Hello, good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. I am, of course, Aaron Bastani. Tonight, I'm joined by Kieran and Andrieu down the line. He's not in the studio. Kieran, how are we?
It's all quite surreal being here, Aaron, with you. I think the room is quite echoey as well, and the background is very plastery, so I apologise in advance, but it's great to be with you nonetheless.
That's a real shame, Kieran. We love your takes. I know the audience love them, particularly on foreign policy, maybe in post-production. We'll get on top of things. Coming up tonight, Trump is livid as he accuses both Israel and Iran of violating the ceasefire. A condemnation of the Home Secretary's decision to prescribe Palestine Action continues. We'll play you a chilling phone call between an Israeli operative and senior Iranian general. And Nigel Farage's Reform Party unveils its Britannia card. Before we begin, I want to start with a big thank you. In just 22 days, a whopping 1,579 people have chosen to back our work and support us here at Novara Media with a regular donation. That's right, we asked you to decide where our fundraiser landed, and in the final 7 days, we've shot up to 150% of our original target. We exceeded all expectations. These reinforcements to our supporter base have come at a crucial time. We are working around the clock to bring you accurate information and critical analysis of the most important stories in the world right now. Frankly, the quality of the coverage in mainstream and corporate outlets over the past week has been especially shocking. It's vital that we work to bring you essential, accurate information. And it's thanks to everyone who visited novaramedia.com/support that we can. If you've not already joined us, become a supporter. Go to that link, novaramedia.com/support. It's in the description below. A few hours after Iran launched a volley of missiles towards a US military base in Qatar last night, US President Donald Trump posted this on Truth Social. Congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there'll be a complete and total ceasefire, all caps, in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran have wound down and completed their in-progress final missions for 12 hours, at which point the war will be considered ended. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the all-caps 12-day war will be saluted by the world. During each ceasefire, the other side will remain peaceful and respectful, on the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will. I would like to congratulate both parties, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the, quote, all caps, 12-day war. This is a war that could have gone on for years and destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel, God bless Iran, God bless the Middle East, God bless the United States of America, and all caps, God bless the world. Both Iran and Israel took advantage of that window of time to attack one another. Explosions rocked Tehran and nearby Karaj as Israeli missiles rained down, with the Israeli military issuing a large-scale evacuation order covering a square kilometer of Iran's densely populated capital. In Israel, meanwhile, an Iranian missile hit a building in Beersheba, with Israeli media reporting that 4 people were killed. A few hours later, Trump's ceasefire came into effect, with Trump then posting this. The ceasefire is now in effect. Please do not violate it. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. So, according to the terms of the deal, Iran had to stop firing first, with Israel halting its attacks 12 hours later. But shortly afterwards, Israel accused Iran of conducting a missile strike and ordered its own military to retaliate. Israeli jets then scrambled to strike Iran, leading the US president to post this. Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. I suspect they don't have Truth Social on Israeli F-35s. I could be wrong. A few hours later, Trump posted this. Israel is not going to attack Iran. All planes will turn around and head home while doing a friendly plane wave to Iran. Nobody... How on earth is this man the president? Nobody will be hurt. The ceasefire is in effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Again, signed, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Now, it's not clear that Israel kept its word to Trump. Eyewitnesses in Tehran told Reuters that there were explosions in the city, and Israel has itself admitted to bombing a radar site near the capital. This afternoon, Trump was asked about the ceasefire breach by reporters, and he didn't hold back.
Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Oh dear. This is the genius, by the way, of Donald Trump as a politician. You know, people say he's a billionaire, he's not in touch with the US electorate. That is the median low information US voter. Two brown countries, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, they just hate each other. We can't do anything, we can't sort it out. Leave them to fight it themselves. By the way, there's some wisdom to that. There's some wisdom to that. People are saying, oh, it looks unpresidential. I mean, also, it's a pretty impressive way, I think, of signaling to Israel, this is not business as usual. Yeah, I'm not going to be presidential because you aren't treating me with the respect I deserve as president. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Here's what Steve Bannon, one of the leading figures in the MAGA sphere, had to say about it all.
You have the gall, particularly of what this guy did for you and the grief he's taken over here. You had the gall when he said, this is what I've done, and I need you to be a partner. I need you to stand down. First, here's why I can't stop at all, which is another lie of the many lies we've gotten from the Netanyahu government. A bald-faced lie. Well, then he says, okay, I need you to stand down. I can't have any scale. If you can't get some guys back, it's fine. Goes to bed, gets a couple hours so he wakes up, and you lied to him. That's why he's furious. That's as mad as I've ever seen the President of the United States. And think about it. How did you get his anger like that, given everything he's done for you and the pressure he's under and a couple hours sleep? Now he's got in a freaking plane and fly for, what, 6-8 hours? To sit down with this crowd at NATO, which you know he's just wildly enthusiastic about doing that. And plus putting himself going in the air at a time when you're in a shooting conflict in the world, putting his life at risk to do that. And this is what he gets. This is the thanks he gets. Don't sit there and don't glaze him. Netanyahu goes on Israeli TV and glazes him. Don't glaze him. Don't slobber all over him. It doesn't mean anything. You showed what you really thought of him last night.
Don't glaze him. I love, by the way, how Sloppy Steve has responded to all of this stuff. And you could almost, he's right, by the way. I think that's the angriest I've ever seen with Donald Trump. You could almost see him viscerally, emotionally collapse. He was so close to saying, Bibi Netanyahu, you're fired. Wouldn't it be great? Maybe we're getting there, folks. Maybe we are getting there. I think it's very apparent now to people right across politics in Washington that Netanyahu is taking Trump and the Americans for a ride. And I think there's a real lesson there, by the way, not just for Trump, not just for American politicians, but for Starmer, for Farage, for Merz, for Macron, for all of them, von der Leyen, Kaya Kallas, all the schmucks in European politics. There's a lesson there. You are all expendable, not just for Israel's perceived national self-interest, but for Bibi Netanyahu's. You will go into the dustbin of history for this gentleman to stay in office a week longer. Why on earth would you do that? Why on earth would you be an instrument of his career advancement while destroying your reputation globally? It's a question I've been asking myself a heck of a lot. Other than those initial breaches, both Iran and Israel appear to be respecting the terms of the deal. So far, there's a long way to go. Kieran, what did you make of Donald Trump dropping the F-bomb?
Well, first things first, I think I've solved the acoustics, if not the aesthetics. Tell me if I'm wrong about that after I've spoken, but I hope so. So, I mean, look, I share some of your enthusiasm, or marked enthusiasm around the president saying "fuck" and Israel in the same sentence. I mean, that marks a nice sea change. I don't think I've ever heard or even read a transcript. Nixon was fond of the word, a transcript of a US president saying that word in the same sentence as Israel. Nonetheless, it's really, really difficult to get a handle on what's going on, obviously. It's incredibly chaotic and febrile a situation. What I would say is there are some things that haven't changed. And I think, short of knowing in concrete terms, where the president's at, what his relationship with Netanyahu is like behind closed doors, and where this is going, I think we should just quickly rehearse some of the concrete things that haven't changed or that are clear for everyone to see. So first of all, and I think most importantly, it's in Israel's interest to keep Gaza out of the headlines, out of the international headlines. It's in Israel's interest to continue to stir up and encourage and kick up this kind of fog of war. Right now, while that's happening, and we know why that's the case. We know that launching an attack on Iran was very largely motivated by the desire to turn the world's attention away from Gaza in the first place, because reasons we covered last week, the world was elements of global public opinion and the media and political class that Israel is used to relying on were starting to seriously turn against them. Israel's very good at this stuff. It's always been very, very good at this stuff. So it changed the conversation from one about Gaza to one about geopolitics and common enemies and so on, blah, blah, blah. While that's all happening, I know we know this, but it's worth mentioning, the Harvard study that says there are 377,000 missing people in Gaza. The starvation continues, obviously. The kind of revolting, beyond description, shooting gallery, aid depot, kind of theatre of cruelty that Israel has erected continues daily. Scores and scores of Palestinians are dying every day in Gaza still, and 1.8 million or more Gazans are now herded, it's thought, into 18% of the territory, in which, of course, that is then a breeding ground for disease and so on. When it comes to Israel and the question of Trump's reaction today and being clearly more animated and having more chagrin towards Israel than any of us have ever seen him demonstrate, it's either a miscalculation or it's a trade-off, right? Either Israel thought we can push the envelope and get this president back on side pretty quickly without a kind of diplomatic public bust-up, or they thought it's worth it. It's a trade-off. It will piss him off. He might fulminate in public, but it will be worth it to continue to antagonize Iran. But above all else, it'll be worth it to keep the world's attention on this geopolitical flare-up and away from Gaza. And again, I restate what I said. Nice to hear a president say "fucking Israel" in the same sentence. I don't want to be a kind of Eeyore. I enjoyed it. I laughed out loud when I saw it. But it's important to remember as well in all of that Trump, I know we all know this, but it's worth restating today of all days, Trump is one of the most, if not the most, pro-Israel president of the United States, certainly in my lifetime, and I think probably ever. Whether it's moving the embassy to Jerusalem or, co-designing the plan to remove Palestinians from Gaza and so on. So, the list goes on and on. And secondly, in many ways, and again, this is something we all know, but it's worth stating, this is an old chaos of Trump's. We're living in his wake here, in so much as he destroyed the Obama deal on Iranian nukes, and that has obviously opened the space for Israel to do what it's done and for the United States to follow suit. So he's obviously used this to grandstand to say that he's saved the region, he stopped the war rather than started it. But ultimately, we need to remember the lineage of how we arrived here. few reflections on Trump very briefly. He's obviously driven by id. He's very id driven, which makes him pretty easy to manipulate. And my expectation, unfortunately, is that the Israelis will quickly rein themselves in. Again, strategically, they've got a lot of experience doing this. They're very good at it. They know how to push the envelope and then pull back from the precipice. My expectation is that they will rein themselves in pretty sharply now, get Trump back on side because he is easy to manipulate in lots of ways. And on the Iranian side, I think the Iranians will view this as a victory. I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, particularly, Aaron. But I think they'll view this as a strategic victory, and they'll frame it as such as well, and not without some reason. There was no regime change. They forced a ceasefire, it seems, through military engagement. And Israel was publicly chastened by its closest ally.
Yeah, I'll respond to that very quickly. So Iranian foreign policy and its defense doctrine had basically two pillars. One was proxies overseas, Hezbollah, to a lesser extent Hamas, other proxies elsewhere. I mean, Hezbollah is the paradigmatic example since the early 1980s, and its ballistic missile program. The proxies have basically collapsed in recent years, but the ballistic missile program, I think, is obviously a huge success. It's obviously a huge success. They do not have an air force like the Israelis do. The Israelis have the F-35s. You know, they have some F-14 Tomcats and some MiGs from the 70s. I mean, it's a joke, actually. They're meant to be getting Sukhois from the Russians. They never seem to turn up. So they don't have an air force. They don't have a navy in the conventional sense. We'll park their strategy for asymmetric warfare in the Gulf of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, rather, for another episode. But their strategy of using ballistic missiles in a war of attrition against Israel, I think, has actually been proven correct. And I think you're right, Kieran. It's a win for Iran. It is a win for Iran, beyond just the vindication of that ballistic missile strategy. Iran winning means staying in the ring, right? It's like Rocky and Rocky 4. Even Drago is beating the crap out of you. As long as you stay in the ring and you're not knocked out, you win. As long as there's not regime change and Iran keeps on sending ballistic missiles to Israel, which, by the way, has literally never happened before. It's now happened twice in the last 12 months, both times by Iran. That's a win. That's a win. And I do think that the Israelis genuinely believe there was a shot at some kind of regime, not necessarily change, but disruption, significant regime disruption. We'll talk about that more with another story later on. That hasn't happened. Maybe internally things will shift, but that hasn't happened. And I always thought, I'll finish with this, I always thought that they would go for this when Khamenei dies, the supreme leader, Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. You know, he's only the second guy to have that job after Ruhollah Khomeini since the Islamic Revolution, which, you know, inaugurates the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979. He's only the second dude to have that, right? So if you look at Khomeini as kind of the George Washington figure, you know, they're still very early in the history of that republic. There would have been an opening when Khamenei dies. I think he's 86. And I always presumed that the Israeli strategy was to wait for that. And then they would do something like this. They'd get Reza Pahlavi. By the way, he's the biggest loser in all of this. He's completely destroyed his personal political brand. They'd get Reza Pahlavi. They'd kill the top layer of people within the Artesh, the IRGC, politicians, and they would try something because there would be political chaos, right? In the vacuum created by the death of the supreme leader. I think they didn't do that, Kieran, to return to your point, precisely because they needed distraction from Gaza. They blew their load, sorry to be so rude, vulgar. They did that because they needed to distract from the genocide in Gaza. The week before this all kicks off, you have Nigel Farage, of all people, on GB News talking to Zippy Hotevely on you know, the most right-wing news channel in this country, saying Israel is losing friends. And that's why they did this. I think strategically a very stupid decision, but it was driven by the short-term desire to distract the world's attention from Gaza and also for Netanyahu to remain in office. The anti-genocide direct action group Palestine Action is set to be prescribed by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. According to the Home Office, Cooper will introduce a draft prescription to Parliament on Monday next week. And if it passes, it will create a raft of new criminal offences associated with Palestine Action, carrying penalties as high as a 14-year prison sentence and fines. The following will become crimes under Britain's terrorism legislation. New criminal offences: 1, belonging to Palestine Action; 2, inviting support for Palestine Action; 3, recklessly expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of Palestine Action in a way that might encourage someone else to support them. Christ, talk about ambiguous. 4, arranging a meeting in support of a prescribed organisation. 5, wear clothing or carry articles in public which arouse reasonable suspicion that an individual is a member or supporter of Palestine Action. Publish an image or an article such as a flag or logo in the same circumstances. Publishing a logo, right? This is meant to be a free country. Obviously, for us here at Novara Media, there's great concern about what this will mean for our journalism. If Palestine Action takes direct action against an Israeli arms company, we will be gagged. Our journalists won't be able to offer the analysis they believe to be true of the situation without risking fines or even jail, and for a considerable period of time. But more generally, the prescription would be an assault on everyone's right to speak freely in support of a group that has never threatened violence to any human being. That's right. You'll have to remain silent because this Labour government believes the private property of Israeli arms companies is more important than your right to express your beliefs. Now, maybe you're thinking, oh, but Palestine Action went beyond private property when they vandalised 2 British military planes at the Brize Norton RAF base. Well, you'd be kind of wrong. And that's because those planes were Voyager air-to-air refueling tanks, and we don't even own them. This is from the RAF's website. Air Tanker owns, manages, and maintains the aircraft and provides infrastructure support and state-of-the-art training facilities, along with personnel, including sponsored reserve pilots and engineers. Air Tanker is, wait for it, a private aircraft leasing company. Look, we're not the only ones concerned about Yvette Cooper's crazy decision to prescribe Palestine Action. The Guardian published this editorial today. As you can see, it's a big question they're asking. If red paint is terrorism, what isn't? Very, very important point. And they point out that Yvette Cooper is trying to criminalize dissent and to redefine nuisance as extremism, supposedly in the interests of national security. In that editorial, the Guardian staff say this. This is a government that seems all too eager to project control over protests at a time when its foreign policy is deeply unpopular. That's beyond any doubt. It may seem cynical to suggest that redefining visible dissent as a national security threat is a way to contain public anger, but the effect is the same. And when it comes to Gaza, ministers struggle to locate in law the actions of the UK or Israel, yet they have no such difficulty when it comes to those protesting against them. The Labour peer Shami Chakrabarti was right to ask, when did criminal damage become terrorism? If civil liberties mean anything, they must survive protest that offends. Democracy can't just tolerate disagreement, it must stomach defiance, even when it's splashed on an arms factory wall. Now, it's not just the liberal media that's against the prescription of Palestine Action, because The Guardian are joined by right-leaning libertarian magazine, Spiked, and they published an opinion piece about all of this, penned by legal editor Luke Gittos. In it, Gittos disapproves of Palestine Action's vandalism, but argues that that isn't enough to make them a terror group. Gittos makes this point about the implications of prescribing Palestine Action. Prescription requires the Home Secretary to decide that Palestine Action is, quote, concerned in terrorism. While many in the public may see Palestine Action as a threat to Britain's interests, it would be hard to justify designating it as a terrorist organisation. Its activists have not set out to target human beings, and nor have they carried out acts of political violence, although they have allegedly attacked police officers in the course of their stunts. Palestine Action may well engage in criminal activity, but the idea that it belongs on the same list of organisations as ISIS or Hamas would strike most right-thinking people as draconian and wrong. While Palestine Action's protests are often reprehensible and clearly criminal, that does not make them terrorists. Indeed, it makes a mockery of our anti-terror laws to treat them as such. There are already plenty of criminal statutes that can be used to prosecute those who vandalise essential state infrastructure, and these have rightly led to harsh sentences in similar cases. By the way, on that point, I couldn't agree more. There's a very cogent centre-right argument against the prescription of Palestine Action. Very cogent. There are laws already on the statute books that you can enforce to deal with this. Time after time, though, with the British state, rather than enforce the law, they create new laws or they clamp down on free speech. This case, it's a bit of both. As to how exactly did Keir Starmer's government get to this point of branding direct action protesters as terrorists, of putting Palestine Action, we should be clear about this, on a par with the likes of ISIS? Well, The Guardian had a second article on Palestine Action today, this one by its legal affairs correspondent, Harun Siddiq. And in it, he gives these details of the process that led to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, demanding prescription of the group. Internal government documents released under Freedom of Information laws have revealed meetings apparently to discuss Palestine Action between the government and Israeli embassy officials, although they were heavily redacted. Ministers have also met representatives from the Israeli arms firm Elbit Systems. The organisation We Believe in Israel, which Labour MP Luke Akehurst used to be director of, began a campaign this month to ban Palestine Action. In an accompanying report, We Believe in Israel stated, quote, in July 2022, the group was investigated under counter-terrorism protocols following intelligence suggesting contact between some of its members and individuals linked to Hamas-aligned networks abroad. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of ambiguity there, suggesting contact, linked, aligned. Basically, bullshit bingo. While the investigation yielded no direct terror charges, bullshit bingo Mark II, it underscored the degree of concern shared by law enforcement agencies over Palestine Action's increasingly radicalized behavior. It is not clear how or why We Believe in Israel was granted access to classified documents. Kieran, what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, we're hearing all the time, and we've been hearing for years and years now, as long as I can remember, that liberal democracies are dying. And I think what this shows is that in most cases, certainly in this case, if this so-called liberal democracy is dying, it's actually committing suicide. It's choosing to commit suicide for multiple reasons, and we'll come to Luke Akehurst in a moment, and the Israel lobby and their involvement, because it's very clear that their fingerprints are all over this. But I think there's a larger thing. I think that this government set this country on this particular suicide track, downward spiral, death spiral, whatever you want to call it. The origins of that lie early on in this genocide. And when the government of this country, a Labour government in name only, but a Labour government no less, decided to try and flatter and impress foreign governments and elements of right-wing constituencies in this country. I don't even know who at this point. Whoever they are, they're never going to vote Labour anyway. That's also worth saying. But once the government had decided that it was desperately going to try and flatter foreign countries, a foreign country in particular, and constituencies in this country that will never vote for it, it was implicated, right? It was implicated, and it had to double down. It was fight or flight, and it's chosen, obviously, fight, because that seems to be all it knows how to do when it's fighting, when it's not fighting, large, powerful interests and so on. So it went into fight or flight mode. It's doubling down. And I think that this is probably the most, because to do otherwise would be very difficult for this government at this stage. It could step away. It could step away from this genocide. It could stop sending reconnaissance missions, using the RAF for that purpose and so on, to help Israel carry out its mass murder of children, its mass infanticide. But now it's implicated, it's doubling down. And that results at this stage in, I think, the most serious assault or the most serious threat, the single most serious threat on civil liberties and freedom of speech in my lifetime. And it's heartening, it is genuinely heartening that The Guardian has taken this line. It's mad, I have to say that, because you would think, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, The Guardian's good, but it's not a no-brainer. So it is heartening that The Guardian's editorial line is as it is, given how much pressure it seems the whole establishment is under from the Israel lobby, especially now or over the past 5 to 10 years. It's also heartening that the the legal expert, the legal editor at Spiked has taken the view he has. It's a genuine pro-free speech position that he's taken. Nonetheless, I've noticed many other elements of the public-facing right. So spoke to people at GB News, I've noticed, and others have taken the reflexively kind of reactionary pro-government position on this, which is if you insult the British Army or if you assail the RAF, you're immediately beyond the pale and you're as bad as terrorists. You belong in the same basket of deplorables as Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on. Well, it's worth remembering that Palestine Action have not gone after the RAF for the sake of being iconoclastic. They've not done it purely to annoy Middle England. They've done it because the government was subordinating the use of RAF planes to a country in the midst of committing a genocide. And so actually, obviously I'm very skewed on this, they might say to me, but I think Palestine Action is doing a massive favor to this country by trying to wake it out of those elements of it that are apathetic, wake it out of its apathy such that its government is able to use its military hardware to help a foreign government, which is wanted by the International Criminal Court, while it carries out its systematic extermination of children and families in Palestine, in Gaza. I mean, I think that's a tremendous favour that they're trying to bestow on the British public and the British state, whether it realises it or not. In any case, like you said, Aaron, and as Ash has said multiple times, this is covered in criminal law. This is already covered in criminal law. And as Zoe Gardner made the point on LBC today very well, there are provisions in criminal law that to protect people who feel like they're who claim that they're acting to prevent greater harm. One example would be a genocide against East Timorians in the late 1990s. Another example was destruction of British military hardware to prevent involvement in the war in Iraq in 2003. I'll just end on somebody I don't tend to quote. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, said that those that sacrifice liberty for short-term security deserve and often end up with neither. We heard a lot of that. We had a lot of that in the early 2000s with the war on terror. If it was true then, it's certainly true now. Subordinating security, subordinating liberty, simply because the Israel lobby asks.
I just want to go to the Terrorism Act of 2000. This isn't going to pop up on your screen, but I think it's really important. This is the definition of terrorism under the Terrorism Act. Because, look, we're going to call Palestine Action terrorists, okay? If they're prescribed. The specific actions included in terms of what constitutes a terrorist organization and terrorism. Serious violence against a person. They've not done that. Serious damage to property. Paint against an asset which is owned by an outsourcing company. Paint. I don't think that meets the threshold. Maybe if they torched a, MOD base, yes. Paint. Endangering a person's life, creating a serious risk to the health or safety of the public or a section of the public. Finally, an action designed to seriously interfere with or seriously to disrupt an electronic system. I don't understand how what they did meets that threshold. Right? ISIS, I get it. Hamas, I get it. Right? That's not a comment on the right of Palestinians to resist, blah, blah, blah. I get it. Within the legal parameters of this country, the Terrorism Act 2000, I get it. Palestine Action, I don't get it. I don't get it. Yes, it's criminal damage. You can argue it's political violence. By the way, there's a ton of political violence. The riots that we saw last summer were political violence. The people that were trying to set hotels on fire, that was political violence. I don't think they're terrorists. I don't think that meets the threshold of terrorism. Political violence happens quite frequently, everywhere, every country. Democracies, autocracies, you name it. Some is justified, some is not justified. Much of that's a matter of opinion. But the idea that Palestine Action throwing paint at an outsourced refueling plane, that makes them like ISIS or the Taliban. I just feel like we've lost all perspective of what's going on if that's now how this country's political class makes sense of things. And I agree, Kieran. I was surprised at the Guardian's response, but you take a step back, you look at the facts, you read the 2000 Terrorism Act, and it's perfectly coherent, isn't it? We're looking right now at UK defense spending, according to Keir Starmer, going from 2% of GDP to about 5% by the middle of next decade. 5%, by the way, that's not going to happen. Right now, it's £60 billion. 5% would make it, I think, something like 140 billion. So an 80 billion, well, that's not going to happen. Where's the money going to come from? 80 billion increase in defense spending. And I think actually that increase in defense spending and this aspired to reinvigoration of the military-industrial complex goes hand in hand with this prescription. I think it's the first of many. It's the first of many. If you don't think it's wise for this country to be spending 140 billion pounds on defense spending, by the way, much of that going to private companies and PFI contracts like these stupid tankers owned by this stupid outsourced firm, if you don't agree with that, I suspect you will find yourself in a prescribed organization over the coming years. I don't say that lightly. It's not flippant. I believe in civil liberties. What happened, whether you agree or disagree, what happened, what Palestine Action did at that RAF base is covered under the law. It's covered under the law. The point is, the British state is now so weak, by the way, primarily because it's outsourced so much stuff, presumably including the security of that RAF base, they can't enforce the law, so they have to create infinity new laws and clamp down on freedom of speech. Because as we saw earlier, prescription doesn't just affect people involved in Palestine Action. It also includes people talking about Palestine Action or wearing a t-shirt or a logo. I think that says a lot about the British state. More than doubling defense spending, clamping down on free speech, free association, and no real democratic debate about the future of this country's foreign policy. That's why we exist here at Novara Media. That's why we exist. We have to have these spaces for a sensible conversation about the future of this country because it's not coming from business as usual political elites. On the 13th of June, Israel began bombing Iran. In a short time, they killed a number of the country's top military and nuclear scientists. And now the Washington Post has revealed that Israeli spies also began their own campaign of private terror, threatening top officials as well as their wives and children with assassination in as little as 12 hours, unless they publicly denounce the government of Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The Post has obtained audio of one of those conversations. According to their source, nothing has been altered other than the disguising of the voice of the Israeli operative. We've added our own English dub to the recording. It begins with an Israeli operative calling a senior Iranian general.
Can you hear me now?
And you are?
Listen carefully. I'm calling from a country that I'll explain to you. Listen carefully. I'm calling from a country that 2 hours ago sent Salami, Bagheri, and Shamkhani one by one to hell. The only advice I'm giving you right now, I can advise you now, you have 12 hours to escape with your wife and child. Otherwise, you're on the list right now. You, all of you, one by one, are on the list that I'm looking at, and you're our next targets. We will hit you, your family, your children, everyone with the dirt. I only called to tell you, look, as long as there's time, I'll give you a reprieve. Like I said, 12 hours from this very minute that I spoke to you, you have time to escape. If not, you have no one to blame but yourself. We're closer to you than your own neck vein. Put this in your head.
This is gangsterism, right? Look, I'm not naive. This stuff happens. But it's really extraordinary to hear the call and the inclusion of people's loved ones. Two of the names referred to there were Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps leaders who were killed on the first day of Israel's attack. Major General Mohammed Bagheri was a commander within the military, and Major General Hossein Salami was commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. The third person mentioned there, Ali Shamkhani, is a former defense minister and a close advisor to Khamenei. He was initially reported killed in those strikes, but Iranian state media has reported that he was actually injured rather severely, but now is in a stable condition. In the rest of the call, the Israeli operative offers the Iranian general a deal.
Which places did you take? What place did you take?
Where did I take? All of these savages, all of these people like Salami. We sent them to that same place they should have gone to much earlier. Do you want to be one of them? Do you want to be the next one on the list? Do you also want to destroy your wife and child? No, right?
So what should I do now?
I'm telling you right now. I gave you a proposal. I called. Shall I say it?
Say it.
You have 12 hours to make a video saying we have walked away from this government and we are unwilling to sacrifice our lives to people who destroyed our country for 46 years. They only killed, stole, took. They only cut the children of this country into pieces.
Well, how should I send it to you? How should I send it to you?
I'll send you a Telegram ID. Send it.
Say it. Say it.
I'll send it to you. I'll SMS it now.
Where will you SMS it?
I have your number. Look, we have everything on you. It seems you haven't understood. It's clear you don't even understand where you are right now. I am telling you, we hit all your leaders. They went into the air. We turned them into powder. Now you're sitting here and you think you're talking to me. You thought what? You're sitting there? I'm calling to give you a proposal to save your wife and your child, you wretch. Are you confused?
That's a really extraordinary clip. By the way, there was a journalist responding to that going, wow, this is incredible. Yes. He's making threats in regards to somebody's wife and their child. You know, it's one thing to say to somebody within the military, we're at war, cold or hot, you're going to do this or I'm going to come after you. I think it's quite something else to talk about somebody's family. And by the way, this is very much a pulling back of the curtain. This is the modus operandi of the Israeli security services and of the Mossad. And I wonder how many of these conversations have happened at the highest levels of politics in the United States and in British politics too, right? When there's compromising information on people in elected office in this country and elsewhere, I wonder how many times there have been similar conversations in regards to blackmail. And you will post X, you will say X, you will record X, you will condemn X. Because that's being done with the utmost confidence by the Israeli operative. They've clearly done this before. It's clearly a tool of war that is in their repertoire. They're very comfortable using it. So you have to ask, how frequently is it used? And is it used beyond places like Iran, like Lebanon, like Syria? How widely used is this approach by the Israeli deep state? Questions you won't really hear posed by legacy media in this country. Again, why? And again, it's worth remembering, Robert Maxwell, the one-time owner of the Daily Mirror, at that time, the second most read newspaper in this country, was reputedly a Mossad spy, a Mossad asset, I should say. According to the Post sources, the idea behind the scheme was to destabilize the Iranian government, presumably by flooding the country with videos of well-known and powerful people turning on the supreme leader. At least 20 people in senior positions were contacted by phone and pressured in a way similar to how you just heard there. But it isn't clear that any complied with the deadly blackmail. Those targeted by the operation were second or third tier officials, with the Post's source explaining the plan like this. The second tier leadership that is supposed to inherit the positions and now fill in the places of those who have been eliminated, they're terrified. And they're being reminded on a personal level about what happened to the successor of Nasrallah and the successors of Hezbollah commanders who were eliminated as well. Khamenei is facing serious difficulties to nominate successors for the positions of officials that were eliminated in the operation. And even if he succeeds to do so, these are people he didn't choose in the first place, because the more serious ones are refusing to take the positions. Now, I think it's really important to say, by the way, there's a fog of war here as well. Iran is a country of 90 million people. The idea that you can take out 20 people and there aren't many, 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 many competent people to take their place within the IRGC, within the extraterritorial Quds Force, a bit like their SAS, civilian negotiators like Kamkani, within the Artesh, the conventional military. The idea that there aren't more people to replace those guys, nuclear scientists, is absurd. Okay? Like I said, it's 90 million people. This is not a small non-state actor. The same is true in the US or the UK, right? If you took out 20 senior people in the military of the United Kingdom, obviously it would be a trauma for the British Army and the British Armed Forces, but there are many, many people who could take those jobs. So I think there's a word of warning there. There's a bit of information war going on in the disclosure of this information as well. What you heard a moment ago, by the way, was a reference to former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who was assassinated by Israel in an airstrike in September. Later, Israel also killed his most likely successor. Kieran, an extraordinary call. I found it very bizarre that some people were sort of lionizing it as an example of how effective Israeli war-making is, because, of course, there's the overt inclusion of innocent civilians, women and children, viewed as everyday collateral damage by the Israeli operative. I guess for journalists covering how the Israelis work, that's just become commonplace now, right? It's not even outrageous. What did you make of it?
Well, Aaron, it's a really important story, and I'm really glad that we're covering it. But I will say this to you and to everybody watching and listening. There is absolutely nothing surprising about this. Any Palestinian, anybody who spent any time in Palestine, but particularly any Palestinian, will be able to tell you that they recognize significant features or elements of this. It bears mention, I think, first of all, that the IDF has had a psychological warfare unit since 1977. It doesn't call it that. It calls it an intelligence warfare unit, but a huge part of its brief and a large portion of its resources are dedicated to psychological warfare and operations. And you could go back, I mean, that's 77, right? So Menachem Begin's time, but you could go back way before that. You could go back to the Nakba. You could go back before the Nakba to the paramilitaries that existed in British Mandate Palestine. But the Nakba is a good illustration of this. You know, I think one element of the Nakba that gets forgotten, the 1948 Nakba, for the creation of Israel, I should say, and the destruction of any hope of a Palestinian state. One element of it that gets overshadowed, shall we say, by the, understandably, by the rank military violence or paramilitary violence and terrorism against Palestinians, is how much psychological warfare played a role in what happened in 1948. So there were things like whispering campaigns, radio broadcasts that were premised on fake interactions, loudspeaker vans driven by Israeli paramilitaries would dart through Palestinian villages and avoid, counterfire, delivering the message that they would be massacred in the coming days if they didn't leave. So the Nakba obviously killed a lot of people, but the misinformation, disinformation, the psychological warfare elements drove that kind of 750,000 Palestinian displacement from their homeland. It was the psychological warfare that drove that displacement more, I would argue, than the paramilitary warfare. During the first Palestinian Intifada in December 1987, so jump forward 40 years, and disinformation was used, it was turned into a fine art practically by Mossad and by the IDF. They went to Palestinian communities. I should just give a bit of context. The Intifada was an uprising among Palestinians, particularly young Palestinians, in and around East Jerusalem and the West Bank in 1987. And it was violently repressed, as you would expect. But for a while, it really caught the world's imagination. And one thing that the Israelis did to put it down as quickly as they could was they spread disinformation around the communities, premised primarily on the notion that comrades had ratted on each other, that they'd basically turned informant, right? And to a degree, it was effective. It was an effective strategy. In Gaza now, the Israelis are using sonic booms. They've been known over the past 20 months to blast in the sounds of babies and women crying and wailing into communities that are on the verge of being bombed or going to be bombed in however many hours or however many days. Obviously, the purpose of that is to instill fear in the community and to drive the people out. That's rank psychological warfare, and it is something that the IDF, you're right to say, Aaron, we're not naive. Of course, we know this happens, and other states do it too. But I would argue quite strongly that the Israelis have made it such a core instrumental tenet of their strategy of colonization and genocide over the past 77 years, and it plays a massively outsized role in their broader military colonial modus operandi. I can even draw from my own family experience on this. I'll say briefly, end on this. I've mentioned on the show before that my family home on the Mount of Olives was invaded in the middle of the night by Israeli police who were bashing down doors, making lots of noise, woke my entire family up, and saying that they were looking for someone who nobody had ever heard of. No one in the community had heard of it. It's a very close-knit community on the Mount of Olives. Nobody had heard of this person. And then they would change the name. They would change the name of the person that they were allegedly searching for. And then violence ensued again, which I won't go into now, but which I've talked about before. So it's that kind of marriage of psychological grinding down of Palestinians, and in this case, of course, Iranians, the marriage of that with more traditional military or police-based violence.
Yeah, it's really striking the way that you can offer the personal example there. And my goodness, there will be thousands of those examples. There'll be thousands of stories just like this of the way that the Israelis use human intelligence, signals intelligence and whatnot in ways that we wouldn't really expect from a quote unquote Western nation. Of course, they're not. Well, they are a Western nation, but they're also not, right? It suits Israel to not be a Western nation. Say, we've been here for thousands of years in the Middle East, thereby not Western, simultaneously being an extension of the West when it suits them. Quickly on military intelligence, there are two units. I've seen in the comments some people talking about Unit 8,200 or 8,200. There's also Unit 504. And the person that was on that call to that Iranian general would almost certainly be from the latter, which is about psychological operations. So you have 8,200 is Israel's GCHQ. And then in terms of human intelligence and, like I say, PSYOPs, it would be 504. And they obviously work together. They're both in Amman, the military directorate. Just an interesting detail there. And remarkably, a man called Asaf Kaplan, who was an officer in Unit 8200, i.e. working for Israeli GCHQ, Asaf Kaplan still works for the Labour Party. He was gathering intelligence, information in the context, of course, of a democratic election. And how can we, do sentiment analysis in real time? Right? And if you said this, by the way, when he was employed, I think it was maybe in the early 2020s, maybe 2020, 2021. If you said at the time, why on earth is a former Israeli officer in Unit 8,200, why is somebody who previously worked for Israel's version of GCHQ now working for the Labour Party? You were called racist. You were called anti-Semitic. What other military intelligence officer can work at a senior level for a British political party? Quite extraordinary. And you say, questions should be asked. Why? Why is he there? Oh, questions should be asked. That's a dog whistle. No, we're not having that anymore. These are serious issues that need to be addressed head on. How far does this go? And I'll finish on this. The information space, as I've said many times before, is the front line of Israel's war efforts. I talked about 504 and 8200. You've, of course, got the Zionist lobby as well. The war for consent, dissent, legitimacy within the media space of both the US and the UK is the very front line of how Israel conducts war. It's not just in Gaza. It's not just in the West Bank. It's not F-35s, flying over Shiraz and Tabriz and Esfahan. It's the battle for hearts and minds in countries just like the UK. That might sound strange or dramatic. It's really not. I'm speaking to Jean-Luc Mélenchon tomorrow in Hackney, the leader of La France Insoumise. I think we'll have a link in the description below if you want to get a ticket for that. There are some left. Very important man. He's redefined the French left. What can we learn from Mr. Mélenchon here in the UK? Kieran, thanks for joining me this evening.
I've really enjoyed the comments in particular this evening, Aaron. I can assure everybody that I haven't been kidnapped by Mossad or anyone else. And Stephen may have done the voice of the Mossad or the Israeli operative earlier, but he hasn't kidnapped me. He isn't a member of Mossad. So I've enjoyed the comments. I'll be in the studio tomorrow, and I'm going to endeavour to be in the studio all the time henceforth because I find it a bit stressful doing it from home. But thanks for having me.
My pleasure. There is a comment in the chat about us not covering disability cuts. There's a number of stories we would love to have covered today. Also, of course, reform and what they're talking about with the Britannia card. We only have an hour show, I'm afraid. We are, though, don't worry, back tomorrow. And of course, that vote is when we will go all in on that story. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.